As some of you may have heard, Justice Neil Gorsuch didn't wear a mask during oral arguments for 2 cases challenging President Biden's vaccine mandates. These arguments kept him in close proximity to his colleagues for 4 hours. Now that the court is again meeting in person, there are strict rules in place if you want to be in the chamber. The requirements include a negative COVID test, social distancing, and wearing an N95 mask. In this instance, Gorsuch was the only person who could not be bothered to follow the rules. Maybe Gorsuch's performative intransigence was simply a way to illustrate the contempt he has for the vaccine mandates he and his colleagues were there to adjudicate. As Ruth Marcus puts it in a recent column, no one is the boss of Justice Gorsuch. And as far as his pseudo-libertarian self is concerned, everyone else can just go to hell. That's the overarching problem. Nobody is the boss of any of the 9 justices. There's nobody to hold them to account. Every member of the federal judiciary is subject to a code of conduct except Supreme Court justices. There's no ethics committee overseeing their behavior, which explains why Amy Coney Barrett, an unqualified hack whose confirmation was pushed through by the Republican-led Senate in 30 days, didn't have to recuse herself from a case involving Americans for Prosperity, which had announced upon her nomination that it was funding a full-scale campaign to confirm her with financing in the 7-figure range. No, there was nothing or no one to tell her that she had to recuse herself. The question is, why didn't she feel she had to? It all starts with the seat stolen from Merrick Garland. Mitch McConnell, the greatest traitor to this country since Robert E. Lee, was able to bend the rules and manipulate the process, as he so often does, in order to keep that seat open in the event a Republican got into the Oval Office. But it was a corrupt move, and only a person without honor would accept such a nomination. Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Barrett are all cut from the same cloth. The awfulness of this particular court is nothing new. It may sound counterintuitive, but in the nearly 2.5 centuries of its existence, the Supreme Court has been one of the most anti-democratic forces in this country. Thanks to McConnell, we are currently strapped with a regressive majority of originalists that seems determined to reshape the country against the will of its people. They have no honor, they have no decency, and they do not care what the majority of Americans want. There are many, many reasons to expand the Supreme Court, but nullifying the power of this bunch of bought and paid for justices should be at the top of the list. My guest today really needs no introduction. Malcolm Nance has been an outspoken proponent of American democracy for years and an extraordinarily important voice in helping people understand the dangers we've been facing, particularly since 2015 when Donald Trump became a candidate running for the Republican nomination. I have been watching Malcolm. I've been reading his spectacular and important books, and I've wondered and wished that more people had gotten his message, because if more people had paid attention and more people in the media had spread the word, I'm not entirely sure we'd be in the mess we're in. So without further ado, Malcolm Nance, it is such an honor to have you on today. Well, how are you?
I'm well, and I'm very honored to be on your show, because I think you're an equally important voice, not just due to your proximity to the problem, but certainly because you speak with such clarity and with such authority due to your career choice that really will help everybody. Because the fundamental problem we are having today, let's be honest, it's psychological.
Yeah. It is. And it's so obvious that it's frustrating, because clearly a lot of people aren't seeing it. What do you make of that?
Well, I come at it from an intelligence community perspective. So from the very beginning of this, when I wrote my first book about the Trump-Russia scandal, Plot to Hack America, all the news media, the journalists were going at it from, ooh, can we get the emails? What salacious things might Hillary Clinton write in there? This is going to be interesting. And when I came out, I was the first person in U.S. news media to come on air, on cable television and say, hey, what you're looking at is an actual attack on the United States by a hostile intelligence agency or directed by a hostile leader in order to destroy democracy, in order to elect Donald Trump as president, and he would be their wrecking ball. And believe me, I got looked at like I was a three-eyed toad for a very long time. And it's quite amusing. But the U.S. news media is very funny about what they take as a source. So it's one thing for an old spy to come out and pull my hair out and say, hey, we're under attack. It took the next book to write the exact same thing that I had said and I had written in my first book, Plot to Hack America. It took the journalist 24 months to write the same book in a longer format. So as an intelligence professional, I had seen it not from the perspective of political, skullduggery or the salacious things that might be found in the emails. I saw this as an information warfare attack designed to craft a new bubble of how America should look at Hillary Clinton with the purpose of converting the minds of many, many American citizens on the basis of nothing, right? Literally on the basis of ether, and allow their darkest views to become reality. And that is more of, let me rephrase that. It's not so much as a physical attack on America. It was an attack on the psychological state of the country. And they manipulated 1/3 of this nation to believing every word of it. And, I'm being a little generous because some in the news media and academia have since come back, right? Now everything I said was true. Everything that was written in the Mueller report was true. And, they go, oh, yeah, that's common knowledge now. But no, at the time, it was ridiculous to think that our psychological state, our entire information sphere could not just be manipulated, but could be crafted for us. As the example I like to use is rose-colored glasses that were not only crafted by another country, but, were polished and lovingly assembled and then put on your eyes, and that gave you the impression, the belief that you made those glasses and you put them on your eyes. And that's what I meant about psychological. This is fundamentally a psychological problem.
Yeah, and it is, I hate to give them credit, but it's brilliant because it turns people's assumptions upside down. For example, who would think that it's easier for an enormous number of people to believe that Hillary Clinton was running a child pornography ring in the basement of a pizza place that didn't have a basement than not to believe that, right?
Get it right. Child abduction murder ring, which traded children all around the world. I mean,
yeah. You can believe that. That's easier to believe than to believe that that's not a thing that could possibly happen in the world. So I think it's the reluctance for many people to believe that people can be so susceptible.
Yes.
That I think is part of the inability to grasp it, which is, as you've said on many occasions, what makes it so effective.
Also what comes into play, and we're seeing it right now in a massive scale with regards to the Democratic Party's level of denial of what's actually happening in terms of the attack on democracy. We are watching denial bias creep into everything. where we
Yep.
are, where you have an inherent belief that everything's okay and that
Yep.
everything is normal, and that the things we're hearing about, even though they're flukes, they're really spikes in the relatively flat signal to noise ratio is the occasional spike. But everything is going about its own business. Well, sure, you can believe that if almost 1 million Americans weren't dead of a major, pandemic event. But at the same time, people don't want to believe that American democracy is under attack, although we got 5 years of that, right? I mean, with Donald Trump,
Yeah.
and then this last year with the insurrection, which, as you know, I had predicted was going to happen 62 days before it happened on
Yep.
Real Time with Bill Maher on HBO.
Right.
And, at that time, everybody was like, it's kumbaya. Let's talk to them. Let's find out. As an intelligence professional, my job is to see trouble, not when it brews, but the ingredients that would go in to boil a pot of trouble before it's ever put on the heat.
Right, and as you're saying, we had almost 4 years of ingredients being thrown together, but then we also had the behavior of Donald and his administration during the transition. In what universe did anybody think that there was any reason to count on them for anything? They were shutting the incoming Biden administration out from everything. They were putting even more people's lives at risk because they totally dropped the ball on COVID, even more than they already had. And clearly, there was certainly on Donald's part and eventually on every Republican's part, the complete unwillingness to accept the results of the election.
Right. And all of this is only effective in the sense that their population, their target population, which now represents as much as 45% of the voting base. Now, if the voting base of Democrats and Republicans, the 150 million Americans that voted are only 50% of the eligible voters, that means they represent only 25% of the eligible voters in America. But that 25% was more than enough because, one, they apparently lost their minds. And they lost their minds in the sense that the belief system around them was carefully crafted. First, it was, you mentioned that when I talked about the foreign intelligence agencies creating this information bubble that transformed itself, moved over the United States, then fell upon this target population. That was not something they developed in 5 years or 6 years. That was the entirety of the academic and psychological study of the psyche of the American public since the founding of the Soviet Union. Because in the Soviet Union, their academia worked for the state. And so, Vladimir Putin, when he became, president of Russia and an oligarch and the Soviet Union was gone, the archives are still there. Russian intelligence uses those archives. So when they say, hey, what's a breaking point, a fundamental fissure in the American flag? What's the weakest knit in the seam of the American flag? They'll go, let's go back and ask everybody at Moscow University, go do some studies, and they come back and they go, well, we've studied this for about 70 years, and it's racism.
Right, exactly.
And then we go, give me he goes, and then somebody will come in with a wheelbarrow, right? And they will have a wheelbarrow of KGB studies on information effects on the American population. Now, that was just Putin when he launched his campaign. The real effect came where they had found the right person to carry their message. Then Donald Trump personally internalized that message, and it became his message. So by 2018, the Russians, not only could they not influence things, they didn't have to influence things. It was all now the Trump administration. And the sycophants in the Trump administration saw their bread was being buttered by the base population, which loved his, gentle promise of harm to his enemies, right? And then when he got
Yeah.
more mouthy, they loved it all.
Yeah.
You know, Mary, I took part in the documentary Unfit, which was, from the group of psychologists that did Duty to Warn. And,
Yep.
they didn't ask me what I wanted to speak about. They said, tell me about Donald Trump and his suitability for office. And I started it actually starts the movie where I talk about the PRP, the Personnel Reliability Program of the Air Force and the Navy, which allows you to be a gate guard at a front gate of a base which might house atomic bombs. And so 18-year-old kids are routinely disqualified from this program. Drugs or problems with the girlfriend. They don't want to give them an M16 and sit them out in front of atomic bombs, even though they're guarding a building, a structure that it would take an atomic bomb to get into. Donald Trump was handed the keys to the entire structure, and they didn't care about his suitability because the electorate, in so electing him, chose to, or essentially said, he's psychologically stable for the job because we love him.
Right. And that I have a bunch of questions to pull out from what you just said, but let's stick with that.
Okay.
The fact that somebody so obviously, not just unfit, but unsuited and grotesque, there are whatever adjectives we can use to describe him, intellectually incurious, vulnerable to blackmail,
Right.
on and on and on. You know the drill. How that was allowed to happen when it could have been stopped at any time along the way, and the way you describe Russia and its decades-long project, as soon as the Soviet Union was formed over 7 decades ago, reminds me of the Republican Party's decades-long project that has been kind of gone underground. Because when people say, oh, it's not the Republican Party anymore, it's Donald's party, I'm like, seriously? He didn't change the Republican Party.
Right.
He just revealed it. I mean, do you really think that Mitch McConnell changed overnight because he saw, right? So it's it's an interesting parallel.
But you have to understand, and I know you more than any individual on this planet understands, because your father got it in full, what Donald Trump can do when he could mobilize psychopaths, right? So what you see here is you've seen let me be a little more delicate than what I'm thinking. All right. Okay,
you don't have to
won't be. Can you use bad language here?
As much as you fucking want to, yes.
He authorized the assholing of America.
Yeah.
You had other sycophants before him. You had other, people who were like him. Paul LePage, the former governor of Maine. This guy was just a loudmouth bully, right?
Yep.
Sarah Palin, the originalist idiot of America who, her pithy, moronic statements appealed to the Walmart mom. Donald Trump came up, boom, 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 right? And he's this character, this cartoon caricature of a human being, which every other person in my world saw as Richie Rich, okay, the poor little rich kid, with the robot servant grown up and, had essentially stepped in to the ring as revenge because a black man made a joke about him. When Barack Obama, insulted him about his big decisions that he made on The Apprentice, he got up and left. He was mortally offended by that.
That was 2011, the White House Correspondents' Dinner, I believe.
But his ego, was so bruised. However, you have to understand that for Donald Trump to win the presidency, I believe the statistic was, for the first time in American history, he would had to have won 67% or more of the white male vote. And at that time, Mitt Romney had come close at like 63, and everybody was like, no one can break that extra 4%. He blew that out of the water. and principally because he was the avatar, right, for the people who wanted to publicly be assholes.
Right. I mean, the way I put it, I like the way you put it better, but he gave people permission to be their worst selves.
Yes.
And to revel in it.
Yeah, because you know why? Because he's the tribal chief.
Right.
He became the appointed, not commander-in-chief. He became the chief of the white supremacist tribe in the United States. And in many dog whistles and his idiotic way of speaking, which he got, he gained all of this panache at speaking to people who were relatively uneducated, or even the educated who wanted what he wanted, by being the rich billionaire in worldwide wrestling entertainment. When he would come in there with the big check, right? And he would say,
exactly.
"Oh, I'm going to give this check to the bad guy because he will win." And then the good guy wins and shames them. And Trump comes over with the fake check and goes, "Oh, you're actually the good guy." He understood the fundamental base of America. And he understood that it was bread, circuses, violence. And if
Absolutely.
any character, I hark back to popular media all the time. I don't like to do it, but it's the only way I can speak to many people in the audience. If I were to pick a character to describe Donald Trump that you would immediately understand the way that he did things, it would be the character Commodus in the movie Gladiator, the emperor, right? Kills his dad, right? Sends his best general out to be decapitated, kills his wife and child, makes him a gladiator, and then somehow finds himself in the ring with this guy in front of the bread and circuses. But the only way he can win is to shiv the guy in the kidneys, right? And then give them the show. If the character Russell Crowe played in there, his name escapes me right now.
I can't remember it either.
Oh, I have it on the tip of my tongue. But he represents the stability and honor of the republic, and sacrifice for Rome. Same with America's honor and everyone who stood before him before, including now. Okay? The people Trump spoke to don't want to see honor. They like it in the form of military people, which is why they're always claiming the military is going to do a coup for him, or B-1 bombers flying over, football games and helicopters visiting and all that stuff. They have this caricaturish cartoon character. Whereas a person like me, I'm sorry, I am steeped in the honor of this nation. My family's been in the armed forces every minute since April 1864 to today. Okay, there's a Nance right now. My niece is retiring, but she is the last of the Nances right now of 150 continuous years of service. Donald Trump doesn't care about that. He doesn't know about it. He didn't understand the trappings of dignity and honor in the White House. He was there to make bank. And he understood, rubes love me, I can get things from rubes. And then he saw the depths that the individuals around him would debase themselves. They would literally crawl on the floor and lick his boots. And that emanates a mindset of power. And it's not just the power of pressing the button and the Coke, Diet Coke comes in. Okay.
Although that was probably the most important thing to him.
Oh, of course. Probably. Well, exercising power. But I think he also, he's, the reason I understand Donald Trump and why I hate him so much and have complete disgust is I spent every minute of my 20 years in the armed forces looking out for guys like this who would get us killed or would steal or would do something like sell classified information to another country. I was always on the lookout for this guy, which is why he had only a 31% approval rating in the armed forces. We do not suffer fools gladly, and we hate idiots. Trump understood that, which is why General Milley was turned into his little puppet and was manipulated at every turn. and why he wanted, I went to Bastille Day last year in Paris for the first time. And when I saw Macron being escorted by 200 of the Republican Guard on their horses in gold breastplates from the Napoleonic era, I said, this is all that Donald Trump thinks about.
Of course it is.
Because honor him. And
as you say,
roots.
and because it would be honoring him. It's not about honoring the country or the history.
Right.
It all redounds to him in his very small mind.
God.
But, what's kind of, I don't know if mystifying is the right word, because I guess if, we take a step back, it makes sense. But just on a human level, you understand this in a way many people don't. The idea that there are people in the world who are even weaker than Donald. It's so astonishing. And one of his few skills is recognizing the weakness in people and co-opting them to either to make him better able to get his agenda across, or much more likely just to bask in the glow of that power. Hey, you're my follower. If you want to bask in my power, you need to put your life at risk by coming to one of my rallies, not wearing a mask, right?
Right.
So what I really don't understand, though, is you mentioned the White House Correspondents' Dinner in 2011. We've had so much information for so long about exactly who this person is, about exactly how to manipulate him, and exactly how vindictive he is and money hungry and power hungry he is. There must have been other people in a position to know what was going on. Why did it seem like you were the only person shouting it from the rooftops? Like, where were the people behind the scenes putting up the guardrails?
There were other people out there. I mean, you have like scholars like Sarah Kendzior.
Sure. I mean in the context of your profession.
Oh, in
obviously,
the context,
Sarah Kendzior, David Corn.
I am going to explain this in a way that if you look at my last 5 years, it becomes very obvious. Because I don't like tooting my own horn, but I'll secure my humility here for a minute. Everything I've written in 4 different books about Trump and Russia, and this new one about the incoming insurgency, or not, it's not even coming. I had to remove the word coming from the title. The insurgency that has arrived has been correct. And the reason that I'm correct is because I understand, on the basis of experience and precedence, I've seen these rises to power. I mean, Iraq was one of my countries for over a decade. And so was Libya. And so was Syria. I know what a strongman, dictator is. I lived in Italy under Silvio Berlusconi. Okay, and I speak Italian, so I could read the papers, and every time I see the word Berlusconi, the word El Buffo, right? The clown comes into my mind. He may be elected president again in the next couple of weeks in Italy. So I suddenly, when you see these people, these seemingly unsuitable characters rise to power and then use that power to hurt and damage their enemies, okay, you get it, the impression, you can easily understand where it comes from. And it comes from manipulating the people who love proximity to power, to steal a phrase from the Hamilton, right? The musical Hamilton. Proximity to power, right? Proximity to power overseas means proximity to money. And I lived in Abu Dhabi for the 10 years prior to Trump coming into office. And I had, my wife, my late wife, God bless her, was a mega projects landscape architect. She had a $4 billion budget. And one of the things she used to say over there was, these people have stupid money. Stupid money. Not even, And one of the things that I realized as soon as Trump was elected, and the way that Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Qatar went at him, I suddenly realized for the first time in American history, really the first time in American history, foreign powers had a man who could be bought
That's
for
right.
cash.
Who was also surrounded by other people
Right.
who could be bought.
Well,
Kushner, his children.
The way that, let me give you some Middle East camel market savvy 101. The money never comes to the boss. The boss never
Right.
handles the money.
Right.
All right? It's always, I'm going to cut a deal with you, and some money's going to fall off the table after we eat the goat, and my bro is going to, my son or my son or my cousin or my brother is going to come to you at another time, and you're all going to have tea, and a boatload of money is going to fall off the table into a bag. Not a word
Just like
spoken.
the boss. Exactly. Just like the boss doesn't make the direct threats.
Absolutely.
Either.
Right. It's all by inference. And it's like Michael Cohen. I did his podcast. He's really burned about the whole Donald knows how to issue a threat and you know how to pick that threat up and run with it. And so I've seen that overseas. But now what I saw was a completely new thing. And the only points of reference that I had that made me really feel like I'm starting to get the trend. And this is why I could come out in 2016 and have a book published 8 weeks before the election saying America's under attack by a foreign power and its puppet. Because I had seen this in South Africa, right? And then I had seen it in Serbia, okay? South Africa, apartheid state, right? Minority rule, and essentially a fascist-run state. And Serbia, technically a majority state that essentially wanted to commit genocide against all its previous neighbors over a complaint that happened in the 11th century. So, I mean, and I was in Bosnia when they were out there massacring people. So those 2 points of reference led me to believe an interesting and unique phenomenon was happening that hadn't happened since 1860. Here's why nobody saw Trump as being successful and winning, whereas anyone who really watched could see he was going to win. Trump was armed with the camouflage of whiteness.
Yeah.
He was a white male that appealed to not just the lower class whites. Trump got the majority of middle class white men and 51% of their women.
Yeah. So I agree with you. I think the foundational problem, obviously, in this country is white racism, but it is still the problem. And unless and until white people fix it, I don't know how we can ever get to a point where we're actually a democracy.
Right.
Because what I see, there are a bunch of warning signs, but one of them is how the Democrats continue not to empower its base.
Yes.
Which is very frustrating. And then there's the fact that, as you said, Sarah Kendzior, David Corn, other people were out there and they were connecting the dots and they did understand what the problem was. And as I wrote recently on Twitter, like when even more stuff was coming out, none of which is surprising, about January 6th and Donald's role in it. Right. It's like, can we stop calling them alarmists now?
Right.
Like, you're not an alarmist if you're right about everything.
I actually had Andrew Sullivan call me a conspiracy theorist and a fabricator.
Consider the source.
On an MSNBC program. And
seriously?
And it was about the Mueller report. And the woman who was with him, I think it was Zerlina Maxwell, said, I've read this stuff. That should be called the Malcolm report. I've heard this for 3 years. And he was just like, he's a liar. He's a fabulist and a conspiracy theorist. And it's like, really? There is a factor out there. My literary agent will tell you that she has an author who's a university professor who wrote a book called sorry, I'm just having a sneezing moment.
We're not doing well with names today.
Evidence. And the premise of the book is that no black person will ever be listened to until a white male has validated that evidence.
Yep.
And
Yep.
guess
I
what?
think that's
Turns
true.
out it applies to women too.
It does indeed.
So it's
Yeah.
minority evidence, I think is what we should call it. But what you're seeing is a resurgence of white power in this country. And they want to know the question that was asked by one of the Charlottesville crying Nazis to me, Anthony Bissonnette, when he said, how come we can't say white power? And he caught me to sort of ambush me with his podcast. And what he didn't expect was my answer, which was, oh, sure, you can say that. I spent 20 years risking my life so you could say that. My great-great-grandpappy fought in the Civil War so that you could say that. You can say any stupid thing you want. And I warned him, just don't act on it. And guess what that guy did in the Capitol? He was one of the people who entered the building, has now since been arrested and is being convicted for what I told him. Don't act on it. Once again, a good example of black evidence. You better listen to the magical Negro, because I'm sorry, but that's what they call it in Hollywood, right?
I know.
And it's better to just take that. But let's not worry about our opponents. Let's worry about ourselves. Democracy is not only, I want to go back to democracy, because I'm from Philadelphia, right? I am born and bred Philadelphian, born in the Philadelphia Naval Hospital, and which, is a badge of honor for me. I grew up in the shadow of Independence Hall, the Liberty Bell, and the most significant place that I had found that has guided me even into the intelligence community, and that's Washington Square. And I did not understand the sacrifice in the American Revolution until I went to Washington Square, which is right behind Independence Hall. And Washington Square started as a black cemetery for all the slaves in the Revolutionary period. It was actually on the edge of the town. And during the Revolution, so many soldiers were brought into the city themselves to die of cholera and smallpox and typhus, that they had to bury them in the black cemetery. That cemetery that park has 2,500 dead Revolutionary soldiers in it. And there's a big statue there, and it was the first tomb of the unknown soldier in America. And written across the top was what Washington said about it, that the light of freedom is a light for which many have died in darkness. And when I went into the intelligence community, that became my call. That became my call sign. But it's not just freedom that's under attack now. It's the entirety of the American Republic. The American experiment is under attack. We have perhaps 10 months before everything that has ever been written and fought for since the founding of this nation could go away, and we dive headfirst into autocracy.
I agree with you 100%. I think we have until November 2022.
We do. So the thing with Republicans is that they don't just want to dive headlong into an autocracy. They're going to make a constitutional autocracy. And that's where you have the fig leaf of the Constitution, which will be applied randomly and mainly only to the minority. And this has happened in many countries. But they'll say, oh, you still have the right of freedom of speech. Yes, you have the right of freedom of speech, but they may still arrest you with secret police. They may have their militias come to your house and exercise freedom of speech like they do to these school board members, and where they come to your house and they sit out there with bullhorns and they get on the sidewalk and they harass you. Yeah, so they will weaponize the Constitution to harm you. And that's where we need to understand this moment is the moment we need to fight.
And this is why it is an all hands on deck.
All hands.
The more people like you are out there, the better. We need our voices to be amplified and spread as much as possible, because a lot of people, it's not that they don't care or that they just don't get it. They don't have the luxury of paying attention the way we do.
Right.
And it is, as we said at the beginning, it's just easier to assume that everything's going to be okay. And I think that's part of what's going on now. Joe Biden won. Whew, okay, everything's cool. No. In fact, I think things are worse now than they were.
They are.
A year ago, because we have gone even farther down the road. And what you just said about weaponizing the Constitution and using it as a fig leaf to cover up their autocracy, that's another long-term project. That's not Donald.
Right.
He just, fit the bill. I think Mitch McConnell recognized immediately what he was going to get with Donald. He was going to get somebody who would sign off on anything as long as he got his money and his power. And Mitch McConnell was there. By the way, the greatest traitor to this country since Robert E. Lee. Mitch McConnell was then free to wreak havoc on the judiciary, on the Senate, et cetera. So all of that having been said, what do you think is the best, other than just screaming our heads off for 10 months, what is the best strategy? Do we try to make common cause with the Republicans? Do we just, I'm sorry. That was just for the benefit of the listeners. Seriously, what do you think are the best ways to go about securing our democracy and making sure the American experiment doesn't fail?
Well, I'm glad you asked me that. First, let me make a quick comment about Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell. They just need to recall, and I know they're getting everything they want, and they also get that proximity to power, but more importantly, they get the pats on the back. They get people who are like them, right, coming to them at the country club and going, "You're doing, God's work. You're helping Donald do this." One caution: Robespierre, the leader of the French Revolution, was eventually sent to his own guillotine that he had lopped off the heads of tens of thousands of aristocrats. Because, like the Communist Revolution, these internal loyalty-based activities or revolutions, if you want to call it that, always eat themselves. If Kevin McCarthy, and I say this honestly, if Kevin McCarthy thinks he's going to be Speaker of the House next year, he's got another thing coming. I mean, it was Jason Johnson who called this last May.
Yep.
When he said they will elect Donald Trump as Speaker of the House.
I agree.
And then Ted Cruz came out in August and confirmed it. That's what the plan is. Elect Trump Speaker of the House. Let him sully and disgrace the office Nancy Pelosi held, the way he did it with Obama. Kevin McCarthy's never going to be Speaker. Never. And they want him to use this as a launch pad, the Speaker of the House, the number 3 person, spoiling Joe Biden. Can you imagine the number of attempted assassinations that could happen if that were to occur?
Assassination attempts, impeachment trials.
Oh, there will be impeachment trials. They've already said that, too. They will impeach Biden monthly.
That's
and
right.
So that they want him over three for anything, and they will make up the reasons. And they said they'll make Benghazi look like, like a kid's parade. So we're here trying to, when I say we, I mean all of those who are the loyal Americans, the true people, the true we the people, are sitting here as 65% of the electorate. Let's call it 60. We'll give them their vote, right? And we are about to be ruled over. Okay? I said this last week when I swore my oath again on Twitter to the armed forces of the United States. And I said, I swear an eternal oath that I will die before Donald Trump becomes president again. Before Donald Trump takes this nation into autocracy and dictatorship.
Right. Yeah, because we know he will not be legitimately elected. There's no way. But they don't care about that, right?
But
and
let me
I think
define really quickly what I mean by I will die before, because some people like to misinterpret what we say.
Of course.
I will stand and put my body before any riot squad, before anybody. I will stand pat. I live, where I'm at right now is 20 miles from the Norman Rockwell Museum. And a few weeks ago, I had a visitor from Canada. And it was, oh my God, drove them over there right away. And I said, there is something you need to see here if you want to understand how I feel in my heart. And in the middle of the Rockwell Museum, which is wonderful out in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, there is the paintings of the four freedoms. And Rockwell had done this as part of, after Franklin Delano Roosevelt had put out the call, guaranteeing the four freedoms. Freedom of one, which is the painting of the grandmother with the huge turkey and everyone sitting around the table, right? That America is a prosperous nation and you have a freedom not to starve. The other was freedom of religion, where they had people from every country. And the golden rule at the bottom, do unto other as others would do unto you. Then you had freedom of fear, where the mother and father are tucking their children to sleep. And you're wondering, if you don't look at that painting carefully, you don't understand it. The newspaper in his hands are about, hundreds of thousands dying in Europe. And he's like, it's four level broad print of some disaster that's happening in Nazi Europe, right? And putting their kids to sleep suddenly became a question mark. And then I walked them over to freedom of speech. And I love that painting. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little caught up. When I talk in public over the last 4 years, that's the image that comes into my head. Standing up and having your say and saying what you believe. The problem is that image is now being corrupted by the people who say, when are we going to start killing people? I mean, when do we get to use the guns? Right. Someone said that in public,
with no pushback,
with his own face showing, and people cheering him. Okay?
And no Republicans stopping it. None. Nobody's saying that is unacceptable.
Here's what, I spent every minute of my life defending this nation. And I said this I was on Joe Madison's show, who's starving himself to death, even as we speak. And he asked, Malcolm, what would you say if you saw Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema together in the hallway? And I said, here's what I would say. I would say, what is wrong with you? America is on the edge. You too could kill this nation. You could kill what my great-great-grandfather escaped slavery to defend. He joined the Union Army to be part of the more perfect Union. My great-great-granduncle lies dead in Fort Leavenworth Cemetery, dying in the Indian Wars as a Buffalo soldier of 9th Cavalry Lima Troop. My father went to war in World War II at 15 and fought in the South Pacific. I dodged bombs, missiles, suicide bombers. I stepped on an effing landmine, thank God, that didn't detonate. But you know what? Every Nance who served in the armed forces, including my niece who was in combat off of Yemen, okay? Every one of us would give our lives to ensure that you two idiots vote correctly and you save this nation, that everyone has a right to vote come this November. And guess what, Joe? You will be reelected because the vote will be balanced properly. And anyone who wants to vote for Joe Manchin is free to vote. Kyrsten Sinema, I don't get her. She's free to be voted out. But, that's what I would say. And, I mean it from the bottom of my heart. The motto of the U.S. Army is this we will defend. That needs to become our motto. So what do? You ask for a solution. I have one solution. I said this I can't remember which radio show I said it on, but here in New York State, upstate New York near Albany, they elected an African-American congressman. He is on the chopping block. The Republicans want this seat back. The district is 93% white. and it's overwhelmingly conservative, and he beat that guy. He beat a guy by the name of John Faso. And you know how he did it? New York 19 Indivisible held a thing called Faso Friday. Every Friday. It started with like 5 people would go to the office of John Faso and say, is John Faso here? And they go, no. And then they would all stand outside and drink coffee and make jokes about John Faso. It became, over months, a block party. Everyone went there every Friday. I mean, it got to like 100, 150 people. They didn't impede people. They didn't chant dirty things. They didn't throw things. They went there to have coffee and to show the representation, their representative. Oh, by the way, guy never came to his office for 2 years, right?
That's the impression I'm getting.
It became a phenomenon. And while they were there, they registered people to vote. They showed the community, this guy's a loser. He doesn't even come to his office. They did what Russia told, Vladimir Putin warned Donald Trump of. A color revolution, right? A revolution that where people will come together through popular mobilization and will defend and take back their country with the vote. And that's what I would recommend every Friday. All of these groups, even your mom and pop groups, go walk your kids and your dogs down to the office and have coffee. And even all the Democrats, all Republicans. I don't care which side you're on. And we need to show we will defend democracy. That's all you need to do. Have those signs. Defend democracy and push them on it. Get rid of whatever your little thing is. If it's climate change, drop it until this election is over. If it's save the whales, drop it until this election is over. I'm really pissed off about these Democratic groups, African-American groups in Georgia that just gave Joe Biden a black eye because they're demanding action on voting rights. The man is there to talk about voting rights, right? And if you don't support him and you don't mobilize people, you're making people think in the district where my father grew up. You're making them think, black people, and you're making others, allies, think that you don't have his back. Everyone needs to have America's back now.
I agree with you. I have a policy, and it's a new policy because I never had trouble criticizing or critiquing Democratic administrations before. I will not say a negative thing about President Biden. He was dealt the worst hand of any president in modern history. I'm not saying that mistakes aren't made. I'm saying that there are much more important issues at stake, as you're saying as well. And we all do need to be one-issue voters in 2022 and in 2024. We need to be voting for democracy. That's it. Because also, by the way, any of our pet issues, as important, the Supreme Court's important, climate change is ridiculously important. It's the most important thing, probably. All of our issues are important. But if we lose democracy, we lose on those issues anyway. So I think your passion is so visceral. And I guess, how do we get people to understand, one, what's at stake, and two, that this isn't a matter of semantics. Right. We are literally talking about the soul of our nation, and anybody who's paying attention should feel the way you feel when you're talking about this stuff. It is everything, and it's not just it's our children, it's our children's children. It is the fate of the world, quite honestly, because if America becomes an autocracy, what hope do we have?
When you've got Canada, I saw, people like my friend Tom Nichols was criticizing Canada for the op-ed in the I think it was the Toronto Sun, where they said, what are we going to do about America if it becomes an autocracy? Well, as far-fetched as that sounds, for those of you who don't watch HBO or some of the other channels, there's a TV show called The Handmaid's Tale. And it's where the United States becomes a fundamentalist Saudi Arabia-like autocracy where they organize state-sponsored rape of women, just like in some countries. And Canada is the same.
And Texas.
It's just utterly amazing. Look, this is not a joke. And, it's my job to get out there and stand up. And look, I'm an old Navy chief. My career, it's carved into my arm, and my career job has been to stand up and warn you of when stupid things were happening and the consequences of that idiocy, right? I don't see just stupidity here. I see blindness, willful blindness. And that willful
Yeah.
blindness is camouflaged because the people that are doing it look like many of the people who would have to vote. Okay? I would start I don't know who the billionaires are out there. Okay, we don't have Sheldon Adelsons who will give $100 billion to throw an
Right.
entire election. Okay, obviously we don't. We don't have enough people out there who care. All right? But let me tell you something. What happens in oligarchies to billionaires? Well, like Putin's Russia, they put you out of business using the power of other oligarchs and the market or the government itself. So, a good investment would be the stability of the US market for the next century by ensuring that this election and the election that follows, we do not descend into democracy or insurgency or worse, civil war. The very fact that I have to use that phrase disgusts me. But you know what? I know I've seen some bad things out there. I was in Bosnia for the genocide. I was working missions that supported Rwanda and Liberia and Sierra Leone and other. I visited the Tuol Sleng prison in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, when the blood was still drying in it. Let me tell you something. I spoke twice at Auschwitz. The Auschwitz Foundation called me a couple of years ago for a conference where they were worried essentially about where the world was going. And the name of the conference was Never Again. Really? I said, when Auschwitz Foundation starts wondering whether we could be toppling towards genocide to where, not genocide, autocracy to where genocide could come back, I worry. And I'm not worrying just because I was a Catholic kid raised in an Orthodox Jewish neighborhood. I worry because as an African American, all right, it was my duty to serve to ensure this doesn't happen. We've got Nazis marching in the streets carrying American flags everywhere.
And Confederate flags into the Capitol building.
We're in trouble.
It is, I know so many people who are looking into getting citizenship in other countries just in case things go south in 2022. Or 2024, I guess, would be when things got really bad if it went that far. Because we're not just talking, I personally think that McConnell is looking to create a theocratic apartheid state. Not that he gives a shit about religion, but he knows that it's a really easy way to control people. So
I got some news for you. Mitch McConnell will not be speaker, will not be majority leader.
I don't
That's
think
the big surprise. Remember, Robespierre. Okay, that guillotine is waiting, metaphorically for him. He will not be elected. He'll wake up and find Ted Cruz, probably not Ted Cruz now, or Ron Johnson, or
Hawley, or
Tom
Cotton,
or Josh Hawley will suddenly, in a surprise vote, the young insurgents, the young rebels have taken over. What is the Jacobeans?
The real Nazis
have arrived. No, these people are partisans, and they will elect a government that will weaponize the government against its people, and we will have real tyranny. Going out and making your health better and meeting the preamble to the Constitution does not constitute tyranny. But using the government as a weapon against its own people to put a minority and keep them permanently in power, that is tyranny. That's a dictatorship. It's literally in the Declaration of Independence where they itemize all the things that King George did that, that supposedly offended us as a letter of indictment, right? That's the same, by the way, those are the same articles that people on 4th of July, when it's read, right-wingers think was written about Donald Trump. So we're in a crazy place. But you know what? Instead of starting planning of going to Costa Rica or Canada, which are fine places, my wife was French Canadian, but born in West Lafayette, Indiana, and she took an American passport, but lived in Quebec for 40 years before she moved to D.C. So her loyalty was always here. So why don't you put the effort in to start sitting around with your friends, making up "Let's defend democracy" signs, putting out signs all over your front lawn and barn the way they have Trump signs, and let's start, counterattacking the coup, which was another cute phrase I had the other day. And let's say I stand to defend democracy. I'm having an 8-foot banner put in front of my house, right? And it says, "This I will defend." And it will be democracy. Yeah. And one last thing. Republicans like to say this, but we're not a democracy, we're a republic. Oh, well, if you were smart enough to read, you would know that a republic is a democracy in which the rights of the minority party are enshrined in a constitution or in the laws. So yes, you're a democracy.
Yeah. Yeah, they're just cynical. The cynicism on the other side is breathtaking. And just to be clear, my friends who are they're staying and fighting. Nobody's running away. But I think it's worth planning ahead, perhaps, because I've never met anybody as vindictive as Donald. And one thing he has, I think, brought to the Republican Party, not that he's transformed it, but one thing he has added to it is this sense of white male grievance that is just off the charts. And it's like part of their platform.
And that's why my latest book is called "They Want to Kill Americans: The Malicious, Terrorist, and Deranged Ideology of the Trump Insurgency." White male grievance is now enshrined in the AR-15 rifle. I say this all the time. People don't believe me. I check it all the time to make sure it's true. The price of AR-15 ammunition before the election was 21 cents per bullet. Not bad. 1 year after, it was $1.25 per bullet. These people are buying ammunition at wartime levels. And that many of them have this fantasy of being the Wolverines and Red Dawn and fighting what they call communist forces. The guy that they worship literally says he gets love letters from a communist dictator and panders to a KGB officer. But these people are the patriots. We're going to need to take back that word, patriot, and start calling ourselves the true American patriots. And those people are going to be...
And we need to get angry, too.
What do they call them? The summer soldiers? Isn't that what Thomas Paine called them? I'll take being a winter soldier in Valley Forge any day.
I'm glad you brought up your book, because I wanted to talk about what your plans are for the next 10 months in terms of staying in the fight. As I've said, you're an incredibly vital voice you have been for a long time, but we are at a crossroads in a way we have not been. Certainly not in our lifetimes. I think we're about the same age. Your books are brilliant. Probably there are more immediate. Do you have any more immediate ways, I guess is what I'm trying to say, to stay connected to people and educate people? Because I'm not, it's probably not true, but I feel like you know everything. So, and the other thing that you do incredibly well, which is a rarity in people who write and who speak, who are taking, synthesizing large amounts of complicated information, you lay facts out in a way that makes it easier for people to understand, but also makes them palatable. It's not dry. You're telling a really compelling story that's completely factual and complex, but easy to take in for people. So, what is another medium that you might use to
Yeah,
keep getting
I'm
out the word?
toying with the podcast world because, I'll tell you why. My memoir is going to come out in 2023, and it's got a very cool name, Thinker, Sailor, Black Man, Spy. And
Oh,
the
that's
subtitle is
fabulous.
Patriot
That's
Father,
fabulous.
Widower, I. And it
Wow.
literally encompasses everything that I am. But more important to that I think that when I speak on TV, I might be on 3-4 times a week, and I might have 30, 40 seconds to talk, which is a lifetime on television. But when I went on Bill Maher, Real Time with Bill Maher last August, and they had me on with that Yahoo, Ben Shapiro, all right, he's got like 3-4 million watchers. But then again, I don't have a rich Republican billionaire hand me $10 million and say, go start a podcast network to attack. All you have to do is attack liberals. That's all you have to do. But I know people that listen to him and they go, oh, well, this guy, he's an intellectual and he does these things, and I know he has people who will be monitoring your podcast. And I sat next to him and realized this guy's an idiot. He's a lightweight.
He is.
I spent my entire life starting, I was a Sea Cadet at 15, and then I went into the military when, the armed forces when I was 19, and I spent 20 years working some of the most secretive missions, that I'll never really talk about. I'll just frame around in my memoir. Although my memoir has to be cleared by 3 intelligence agencies. And I realized I'm sitting next to a kid who at 17 called himself the youngest Republican political analyst in America. And then he, was in the Republican Youth Network forever, and then went to Harvard, got a law degree, but never went before the bar. He's not even a real lawyer.
Shapiro has a law degree?
He's never done anything. He's never been anywhere. And he certainly has never served this nation 1 second. Okay?
But that's the problem. I think on the other side, they one of the things they do that Donald is also quite expert at is they make people feel better about their ignorance and their failures.
I mean, it was so funny. When we were on that show, he went off what, it was supposed to be a debate about critical race theory. And in about 30 seconds, this phrase went through my mind. Because, again, I'm an old Navy chief, and we have zero tolerance for stupid, right? This phrase went through my mind. I'm not going to debate this moron. I don't have to debate him. I've been in combat multiple times, right? So I let him talk. And he defined critical race theory perfectly. And then what set him off and got him upset and his followers to attack me is when I said, it's a completely made-up controversy. I only want you to teach history. I don't care. And he was just like, debate me. And that's when I came up with my comment where I said, is this what you do on your show? Because it's really stupid. And no, because I said you suck at it. And the only thing that I regret is that I actually flubbed my next joke, because he really was like I call him the angry chipmunk. And he started yipping like one of those little yippy dogs around me, like, oh, well, I sleep on beds of money. And, and then I flubbed a really good joke. I actually had it in my head to say that if this guy ever gets in my face, I'm going to say, hey, the adults are talking. And I didn't. I accidentally said we need to move on to an adult subject. But I've decided I need to challenge the Ben Shapiro, Dan Bongino, Steve Bannon's on the issue of defending democracy. And here's what I'm going to do. All right? I'm going to call them out every minute of every day. But I will do it in a dignified manner so that they can slink with their tails between their legs and move to Romania or Hungary or Moscow, where Kanye West wants to move to now. Yeah, awesome. Go ahead.
I'll
Traitors Club
pack for them.
I will issue the cards because none of them is a patriot. None of them are people that I could trust. Dan Benigno, former Secret Service agent, betrays the agency every time he opens his big-headed mouth, right? Because he's betraying the fact that he had the duty to serve the nation selflessly and to keep his opinions to himself. And now he uses the credibility of protecting the president of the United States to say, well, I was around Barack Obama and I didn't like him. Yeah, does that mean you wouldn't take a bullet for him? Let me tell you something. I missed a lot of bullets in my career, a lot of bombs, a lot of mines, a lot of missiles. All right? And I never thought for 1 second, oh, I'm not going to defend the Ku Klux Klan. Nope, you're an American citizen. You got the benefit of my service, which is why I told that idiot baked Alaska, go ahead and call yourself white power, right? I fought so you could be just as stupid as you want. Stupid seems to be word of the day for me today.
Well, because it is so accurate about the people we're talking about. I love the idea of your having a podcast, preferably daily. It is such a good way to get access to people. You know, not everybody watches MSNBC. Just it's just the way it is. So I would listen to your podcast.
We will live stream video and audio at the same time, I think. Just sign me up. And Malcolm, I could talk to you for several weeks, but I'm guessing you have a truck engine to move or something. And don't forget the cord of firewood.
That's right. I have a billion other questions I could ask you. It's fascinating to talk to you. This is the wide-ranging breadth of this conversation and the depth of this conversation has been a blast for me. I'm sure for the people listening. So thank you for spending so much time. It was really generous of you. And I hope you'll be back on soon. But more importantly, I hope you're going to have your own podcast.
If I do, I've committed that I'm going to have a segment where I'm going to get you, Michael Cohen, Anthony Scaramucci, and I don't know who else I can throw into that. And we're going to have a roundtable segment called Whiskey Tango Alpha Foxtrot, which is WATF. What the actual fuck? And all I'm going to do is I'm going to come up and I'm going to say,
oh, man.
You know, whatever subject of the du jour, and I'm going to go, what the actual fuck, people? And you guys are going to go, oh, that guy. And we're all going to just green room this fantastic thing, right? Like the door is closed in the green room, and we're going to say, we're not listening. No one's listening but us, but a million people. What the actual fuck? And then we're gonna say things honestly and frankly.
I think that sounds like a plan. I hope there's alcohol involved.
It can happen.
There doesn't need to be. I'm just kidding.
I will mail everyone their favorite beverage.
Oh, that's fantastic. All right, I'm in.
Good.
I'm absolutely in. Thank you again, Malcolm. This is such a pleasure. And stay safe up there.
And
stay warm.
Thank you, Mary, really. And I appreciate your taking the time to invite me. I know I get a little shouty, but, you know, hey, you're Mary Trump. I can get shouty for you.
It's required.
It does.
The times call for it, I think. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, Malcolm. And now for one of my favorite parts of the show, where I get to bring your opinions into the conversation by responding to some of the questions you sent in via email. So for next week, if you have any questions, please send them to, all one word, themarytrumpshow@politicon.com, and I'll get to as many as I can. First up, we have a question from Diane. What needs to be done to draw Republicans back into the Democratic experiment? Well, I honestly think the only way to do that is for them to be in the minority for a really long time. So in other words, Democrats need to vote more in greater numbers than they ever have so that we can expand our margins in the House and the Senate and actually enact legislation that helps Americans without having to deal with Republican obstructionism. I don't see any hope for the Republican Party as it is currently constituted. I just do not. They're dangerous, and we ignore that danger at our peril. So, I don't think it's a question of reforming them from within right now. They need to, any Republicans or former Republicans who don't like what's going on in that party need to start from scratch, basically, is what I would say. This question is from Tina. As a 63-year-old Black female who has voted all her life, and all 10 of my siblings and I were told to vote, why should I want to keep voting, keep being involved when it seems that everyone is cuckoo for Cocoa Pops? To me, it's like, okay, white people, this is on you, fix it, because my attitude now is, like Lady Chablis said, 2 tears in a bucket, motherfuck it. I've never heard that quote before. It's quite something. Tina, why should you vote? And I am in agreement with you about the fact that it seems, well, first of all, that, the core problems in this country are absolutely the fault of white people. That has been the case since this country's inception. And it always, I find it disheartening when election cycle after election cycle, Democrats lean so heavily on the core constituency of its base, which would be Black women. And then in the intervening years, kind of ignore the needs of African Americans in this country. It's really weird to me. I think that the Democrats need to honor and empower its base to the same degree the Republicans empowers its base. I'd say honor, but there is no honor among the Republican base. The difference being, of course, that the Republican base are the fascists and the neo-Nazis and the anti-democratic, anti-American, racist and misogynist. And the Democratic base is basically women and people of color. So it's about time that the Democrats repay all of the efforts made, particularly, again, by Black women. So I don't, however, think the solution to the problem is to stop voting. We have to. We just don't have a choice there. And eventually, I hope that the Democratic Party will respond if we bring enough pressure to bear upon them. Unfortunately, we live in a very precarious time in which we don't have the luxury of protest votes or protesting by not voting. From Marie in Arizona, our state has sadly had 2.5 times the amount of COVID deaths than the amount of votes that the former occupant of the White House lost by. In Georgia, that amount is almost 3 times. Yes, they are killing their own supporters in the battleground states. Will it matter in 2022? I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with the statistics to know the answer to that question. But I think I will say that it's certainly, just arithmetically speaking, is not an advantage to the Republicans for them to keep killing off their voters. It's one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen in my life, that they are literally encouraging their own voters to risk death. On the other hand, though, I think Republicans in power have made the calculation that they don't really need that many voters anyway, because they are enacting voter suppression legislation in practically every state in the country. And of course, they will be focusing most of that attention on swing states. So their plan is to win with a minority of votes, or to have enough cronies in place at key positions like Secretary of State or Attorney General, so that they can just ignore the will of the voter or overturn the will of the voters in the next elections. If a Democrat wins in Arizona and they've managed to have a Republican-led state legislature and a Republican attorney general and a Republican secretary of state, who's going to stop them if they decide that they don't like the results? I'm not entirely sure the Supreme Court will, not this one. So it's pretty scary. From Michelle, why do you think that the Biden administration is getting relatively bad press? They inherited a toxic waste dump. Is it lack of sensationalism? Yeah, I think that's part of it. It's the 24/7 news cycle and clickbait and ratings. I think it's also the fact that for decades now, the right has accused the media of having a liberal bias, and the media has responded by going too far in the opposite direction, quite honestly. I think also, as nature abhors a vacuum, so do the media, by which I mean they need things to be normal, right? So instead of putting everything that President Biden is dealing with in the context of the horrors of Donald's administration, instead of looking at Biden's struggles to right the wrongs of Donald's administrations, they're treating him like the next president, right? That like he took over, everything's his responsibility now, everything's his fault now, and it doesn't matter what happened before. That plus the fact that I think they find him boring, and they resent that. So I think that's also part of the reason they don't give him credit for anything. I mean, the economy is doing extraordinarily well, and something like 48% of people don't know that because the media aren't telling them that. So I don't really know how to fix that. Luckily, we have really excellent media critics like Eric Boehlert on the case. But if we don't have people at the head of news organizations making changes or recognizing the problems or putting things in context, then I worry, because the media are so important in shaping people's perspectives and educating people. So hopefully things will change, but it is going to make what is already an uphill battle even harder. And by that, I mean the 2022 election. From Marcy, what do we do about Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema? The long-term solution to the problem of them is to elect more Democrats to the Senate and essentially make them irrelevant. These are two people who have way too much power, and they are misusing it. Now, don't get me wrong, it's better than having two Republicans. Some very important legislation wouldn't have been passed without their votes. It is a mystery to me why they're making some of the decisions they're making, particularly vis-a-vis Build Back Better and their stance on the filibuster. But again, it's still better than having two Republicans. That having been said, it's not good enough. I think a short-term solution would be for the DNC to buy them off, basically. I mean, they are being bought off as it is right now, right? They're being paid by lobbyists and corporations to do the wrong thing and vote against their constituents' self-interest. So why can't the Democrats pay them off to do the right thing? I'm guessing that isn't going to happen, but I can't really think of anything else we could do in the short term, because Manchin in particular has shown himself publicly to be dealing in very bad faith. So we can't trust him. But it's it's another reason why voting is so important. Let's get 4, 6, 8, 10 more Democratic senators in there so Manchin and Sinema can become Republicans, which is really what they are. What I will say, however, though, is that the Republicans, 100% of the Republicans in the Senate are worse than Manchin and Sinema. So I know it's a low bar, but that is important to keep in mind. From Diane, Biden won and Trump supporters tried to overthrow the government, yet so many Republicans believe the big lies. How can we make sure children are taught the truth in our schools and teachers who teach it are protected? That's another long-term project. I think immediately what Democrats need to do, and what I wish they had done in the Virginia gubernatorial race, is point out that things like campaigning against teaching critical race theory in elementary schools, which is not a thing that happens, is racist. The fact that Youngkin got through that campaign without being referred to as a racist is kind of mind-blowing to me. The way forward, I think, is to start teaching civics again, but not the way we used to, not just 1 year in high school. We read the Constitution. We need to start teaching civics to young children, and we need to teach it every year, and we need to do it in a way that makes it relevant to their day-to-day lives so they understand why it's important, that they know how the government works, and that they participate in their own governance. The other two things that need to be taught in schools are critical thinking, so people aren't as susceptible to misinformation and QAnon nonsense, which leads to the next thing that needs to be taught, which is media literacy. Again, all long-term projects, and which is sort of a theme here, which just reminds us, if we ever want to be able to enact these kinds of strategies, we need more Democrats and many, many fewer Republicans in office. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Mary Trump Show with me, Mary Trump, and some of my favorite people at the intersection of politics, activism, and culture. Please send me your questions for next week's show by email, all one word, themarytrumpshow@politicon.com, or look for the address in the show notes. I'd love to hear from you. Also, follow The Mary Trump Show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen, and please give us a 5-star review. It really helps other people find the show. Stay safe, and I'll see you next week.